Today we're going to look at Indicator 1.5, which is centered around the Constitution. Indicator 1.5 says explain how the fundamental principle of limited government is protected by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, including democracy, republicanism, federalism, the separation of powers, the system of checks and balances, and individual rights. By the end of this indicator, you should be able to summarize ways the government is limited by the Constitution and describe how the government protects individual rights. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, meaning that federal law supersedes or goes above state law. This is outlined in the Constitution in the Supremacy Clause. The Constitution was written in 1787 and outlines how our government will run and ensures the government is limited in the power it has. The Constitution was ratified in 1788 and took effect officially on March 4, 1789. It's organized into three parts: the preamble, which describes the purpose of the document and the federal government; the articles, which outline the structure and power of government as well as how the Constitution can be changed; and the third part is the Bill of Rights. Recall that the Anti-Federalists desired protections for individual rights in the Constitution, fearing a strong central government might try to infringe upon the rights of the people. The Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution as promised by Federalists during the ratification process. It contains the first 10 amendments and limits the national government from infringing on the rights of the people. Rights outlined in the Bill of Rights include freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and press, the right to bear arms, and protections against unfair trials and unreasonable search and seizure. Here is a list of vocabulary you will need to know to understand this indicator. Pause this video and review these words. We will talk about each of them in detail in a bit. The Constitution establishes the United States as a democratic republic. In a democracy, government derives its power from the consent of the governed. This is evident in the preamble's opening statement, "We the people." When writing the Constitution, the framers also based the government on the principle of republicanism. Voters were to be represented by elected legislators who would make decisions in the interest of the voters. In a representative democracy, the people elect legislators, and it is the duty of these elected legislators to make decisions in the interest of their constituents. The Constitution limits the power of the national government in many ways. Voters elect the members of the House of Representatives. The candidate with the most votes is chosen to represent the voters. This is known as direct election. Members of the Senate were not originally elected by the people. Instead, they were chosen by state legislators who had been elected by the people. This is known as indirect election. In indirect election, representatives vote in the interest of their constituents to elect other officials. The framers feared the uncontrolled will of the people, and so they devised a system of indirect election of senators and developed the Electoral College to buffer the impact of the popular will on the election of the president. They believed this would save the people from themselves or from mob rule. In addition, the national judiciary is not elected by the people but appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. This means the people have the least impact on the national judiciary. Pause this video and consider these questions. Can you answer them confidently? If so, move on. If not, review your notes and ensure that you understand the answers to these questions before you move on. The Electoral College is made up of people to vote on behalf of the state in the Electoral College. Each state receives a number of electors based on population. The electors are chosen by political parties prior to Election Day. Once the votes have been counted, the electors chosen by the political party of the winning candidate of a state get to vote to represent that state in the Electoral College. This is a very complex process, and the Constitution is vague on how the representatives are chosen and what parameters exist around their vote. The framers of the Constitution included in the structure of government protections that would limit the power of the national government. The principle of federalism limits the power of the national government by delegating only some powers to it. In a federal system, powers of the government are divided and shared between the different levels of government. Delegated powers are powers that are given to the national government by the Constitution. These are powers that are enumerated or listed within the Constitution. They are powers that only the federal government has. Examples of some enumerated powers include coining money, providing an army and navy, making treaties with other nations, and regulating trade. Other powers are reserved or held as state powers. These powers are referred to as the reserved powers and are guaranteed to the states under the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment states, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people." This means that if powers are not delegated in the Constitution to the national government, they are reserved or saved for the states or the people. For example, if you move to South Carolina from New York, you are required to get a new driver's license issued by the state you now live in because each state has the individual power to issue driver's licenses. Other reserved powers include establishment of schools, conducting elections, and establishing local governments. There are some powers that both the national and state governments have. These are called concurrent powers. Concurrent powers include things like taxation. If you have a job, you pay federal income tax. The federal government collects income tax out of every paycheck. The states also have the power to tax, and in many states you also pay a state income tax. Other concurrent powers include enforcing laws, establishing courts, and providing for the general welfare of all citizens. Pause and take a minute to read over these questions and see if you can answer them. Can you summarize the concept of federalism? Can you describe and give examples of the enumerated, reserved, and concurrent powers? If you can, and you feel confident about these things, move on. If not, take a moment and review your notes, and then move on. The framers divided the power of the national government among three branches: the legislative branch, or Congress, the executive branch, or the President and his cabinet, and the judicial branch, or the Supreme Court. This is known as separation of powers. Each branch has their own powers. Congress has exclusive power to make the law. The executive branch is in charge of enforcing law, and the judicial branch reviews and judges laws to determine if they are constitutional. In Congress, power is bicameral, or divided into two houses. Representation in the House of Representatives, often referred to as the lower house, is based on population and is derived from the ideas outlined in the Virginia Plan at the Constitutional Convention. This is where tax bills originate because they more directly represent the people. Representation in the Senate, or upper house, is based on equal representation, similar to the New Jersey Plan at the Constitutional Convention. The framers added a system of checks and balances to ensure the power of each branch was limited by a competing power in another branch. This prevents one branch of the government from becoming too powerful. For example, the legislature has the exclusive power to pass laws. However, the chief executive or president can veto those laws. The legislature can override a veto with a supermajority vote. If a bill becomes a law and the constitutionality of that law is called into question in the courts, the judicial branch reviews the Constitution and determines if the law violates it. Another example of checks and balances relates to federal appointments. The president appoints federal judges, but the Senate must confirm them before the appointee can accept the position. Also, the executive branch has the power to make treaties with foreign governments, but only the Senate can ratify these treaties. Members of the judiciary and the president can be removed from office with an impeachment procedure carried out by the legislature. All of these are examples of different checks and balances within the government. Take a moment to pause and consider these questions. If you feel confident that you can answer them, move on. If not, review your notes and then move on. You can think of the structure of our government sort of like the structure of a large office building. Imagine you are walking down the street and you come to a 3-story building. Within the building are 3 levels, like the different levels of government. The level closest to you is the local level, where you have the most impact. The second level is the state level, a little further from you, where you have a little less influence over decisions. The third and top level is the national level. It is the furthest from you and where you have the least impact. Within each level of government, there is a separation of powers between the different branches of government. You can think of these branches sort of like 3 offices on each level. Each office is tasked with doing a specific job, but no one branch has more power than the other 2. This is separation of powers. In this scenario, each of the 3 offices or branches checks the work of the other 2, which ensures that no one branch is trying to take over or take more power. This is checks and balances. I hope this video has helped explain how the principle of limited government is protected by the Constitution and Bill of Rights. If you have questions, please rewatch the video or see your teacher.